This is Monica Perez. And
I'm Brad Binkley.
And we are joined today, completely off format for us. It's normally just the two of us talking about the news of the day or whatever deep dive Binkley brings us to. But today we have a guest. Brian Tuohy is the author of numerous books on cheating in professional and amateur sports, including The Fix is In, Larceny Games, Sports Gambling, Game Fixing, and the FBI, A Season in the Abyss, and The Fix is Still In. Brian has written countless articles on the subject and has been interviewed by numerous media outlets, large and small, and has also tapped into other subjects, including having written the book Disaster Government, National Emergencies, Continuity of Government and You. His website is thefixesin.net. Brian, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. Thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate it.
Would you say that's a comprehensive bio? Did I leave anything out?
You could have put in maybe my GPA in college, but no, I think that's got it.
I think it was probably pretty good because I've listened to some of your podcasts. I actually had heard, I knew about you, about your books. I'd listened to you before, and it kind of changed the way that I thought about sports. So a couple of years ago, when the Astros were going all the way in the wake of Hurricane Harvey, I said, oh, yeah, of course they'll win because Hurricane Harvey, Houston strong, blah, blah, blah. Well, my husband's from Houston, and he was like, they're the best team in the league. That's why they're going all the way. And I said, well, but little advantages can help. They have to be good. But, you never know on the margin what benefits they can get. And a couple of years later, just in November, just a couple of months ago, I saw this cheating scandal come down about I don't even know if I want to call it a cheating scandal, but that the Astros were using the monitors in the stadium to steal signs. So I immediately glommed onto that because I was like, see, the little advantages. Maybe they turned a blind eye to this at the time. And I tweeted about that, and a mutual tweet of ours suggested that we get together. And as luck would have it, even though that was a couple of months ago, just yesterday, the league comes down with an amazingly harsh penalty. The manager and the general manager suspended for a year, I think it was. The Astros lost the first and second round draft pick for 2 years. They were charged the largest fine possible, $5 million. And then Jim Crane turns around and fires both of those guys, which to me really went too far. But I noticed that you tweeted you didn't expect any of this. Like a week or two ago, you said, yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. They get away with murder, something like that. Can you tell me if this did surprise you and why?
It surprised me a little bit only because a lot of times when you allow a company, and you should remember Major League Baseball is a business, when you allow a business to investigate itself, rarely does the business find that it did something wrong.
Right.
I mean, that's not their MO. Usually it takes law enforcement, some sort of outside agency, to look into some sort of scandal or sort of wrongdoing before something will really come to the forefront and actual, suspensions and fines and stuff like that get handed out. And in this case, I think Major League Baseball had to do something because enough of this had come out on YouTube. There have been a lot of articles, a lot of think pieces about, what really went on, that I think their hand was somewhat forced. And what I find interesting in all of this is that even though Major League Baseball said the players were really the ones doing this, they didn't do anything to a single player. Nobody got suspended. Nobody got fined. It was just the general manager and one coach. I mean, it wasn't the whole coaching staff. It was just the head coach and the general manager. They got suspended and then they got summarily fired. But at the same time, if the players were doing it, well, why not go after them? I mean, I know supposedly the story is that they basically turned state's evidence for Major League Baseball and they spilled the beans, but still, if they're the ones that were, quote unquote cheating, then why aren't they the ones being punished for it? Well,
I would think maybe an argument might be that they were kind of told to do it, but I don't think that's what the finding of the league was, that nobody really said that. And a couple of things bother me about the whole story is it seems to me highly likely that the Astros weren't the only ones. So if it is actually a scenario where it's an unwritten rule or the rules aren't clear or everybody's doing it, you kind of have to do what everybody else is doing. You can't be holier than the league and do stuff and take the high road at the expense of losing.
You could be.
You could be, but it wouldn't work.
You could follow the rules and you could do what's right. I mean, that would be, the moral thing to do. But again, if you want to win baseball games, you're probably correct. You would, if everyone else is cheating, you too would then have to cheat. And it's just like steroids,
Yes.
And performance-enhancing drugs. If everybody else is doing them, you could just do it on your own merits. But if everybody, again, else is doing it, then why not participate as well?
I always kind of wondered why it even mattered about the steroids. Let them do it if they want. But anyway, sorry. I can't hear you, Binkley.
Oh my gosh, that's because I had my microphone muted, so I was in here talking to my dog.
I could hear the papers rustling, and then I didn't, so I should have realized what happened.
So my question about that is, since sign stealing is not illegal, it was the technology aspect of it that they focused on. Sign stealing that's something that it's like card counting. People are going to do it. And what do you think with the technology? Because there's so much mass surveillance going on. There's always cameras everywhere. It seems to me inevitable that all the teams are eventually going to be doing some sort of surveillance on the other teams within the game.
Well, again, I think it's a lot like steroids and performance-enhancing drugs. I mean, they've kind of proven that the chemists who come up with these creations are ahead of the testers. So it seems like, if you wanted to use, you can use and do it without really being caught because they don't have the testing abilities to catch you doing certain drugs and certain medications. And I think it's the same, like you say, with sign stealing. You can have the technology always kind of be one step ahead of those people who might be investigating you for potentially cheating in this regard. But I still think that, if Major League Baseball knew about this, and I can't imagine, even though it was basically one player who talked to The Athletic that was on that Astros team that started this whole snowball rolling. But I can't believe Major League Baseball was that dumb, just like with steroids. I can't believe they didn't know it was going on in some way, shape, or form.
Well,
So I think their hand was forced because of that admission by the one player that started this whole thing rolling. Otherwise, like you brought up at the beginning, the whole thing about Houston winning after the hurricane and becoming Houston strong, I found to be very suspect.
Right.
Because it's amazing how often, you had the Saints tied to Hurricane Katrina. You've had, the Las Vegas Golden Knights in their first season be tied to the shooting that took place in Las Vegas right when, the NHL season started. And all those teams that get attached to these hashtags, Houston strong, Vegas strong, whatever, always seem to go to the championship game, if not win the championship. It's very quote unquote coincidental that sort of thing happens. So what if Major League Baseball actually knew that the Astros were cheating and let them do that because they wanted them to win that World Series to fulfill the, whole prophecy in a way?
That's what I was thinking. But I also, now it wasn't 2017 when this came out, but nobody seems to have seen this article. But in October 2018, there was an article in The Athletic that said everybody cheats a little. That was a year before the whistleblower came out in The Athletic to give the details of it. And it went into detail about how the Astros were doing it, down to banging the garbage cans. This was in October 2018. So I have to say that the most significant thing about that to me was that Jim Crane went and fired the manager and the GM. And how would he not have known if this was it was on Yahoo picked it up. Yahoo News picked it up back then.
Well,
so I figured people knew.
How did nobody else in baseball realize somebody's hitting a garbage can with a baseball bat, for crying out loud? How many times can that happen and nobody go, hey, what the heck's that sound? And why does it only happen when we throw fastballs? How did nobody put two and two together? That's what makes it so weird to me, is it should have been blatantly obvious to the other teams that, hey,
that's what the first
here.
article in October 2018 said, is that the teams were warning each other about playing at Minute Maid Park.
Well, and that's the thing, because you watched the year that they won the World Series, and Houston's home record was incredibly good. Insanely good. And so, somebody, put two and two together, and here's where we are now. And the thing is, I think if Major League Baseball really wanted to curtail this and really wanted to punish the Astros, they would strip them of the World Series title and make everybody give their rings back. If they don't want to suspend the players, fine the players, then, strip that from them, take that from them, and be serious about it like baseball was 100 years ago when they kicked the 8 Black Sox out of the league for gambling.
I've always noticed that, like, even when Sammy Sosa corked his bat, I was like, he's cheating. Don't you kick him out for that?
I personally think that a lot of sports fans would rather their team cheat and win than not cheat and lose. Maybe I'm wrong in that perception. How do you think that the fans react when, like, a title would be in college, if a title's taken away, or if there's a stain on a championship like this?
I don't think it matters because it's too late. I mean, right now where it's 2020 and we're talking about a World Series that took place, 2.5, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
It's too late. They had their parade. They sold all their, commemorative hats and t-shirts and banners and whatever else. They made all the money they could have made off that championship. Stripping them that title is more symbolic, really, in a way than anything. I mean, it really amounts to really not much of a punishment because it's already in the past. It's already over. And people won't really go back and go, remember who won the World Series in 2017? Oh, yeah, it was no one. No, they'll remember the Astros won.
Yeah.
I mean, whether they cheated or not, that's still the thing that sticks in their heads.
Well, they always say that, or they're saying, like, it didn't happen in the postseason, which, of course, like, that seems pretty highly unlikely. But this makes me think of kind of your bigger point, which where it mostly comes in to play, this fixing, is when a team works against its own interest. And that's where it seems to me that the disconnect is, for gambling reasons or whatever, shaving points or tanking or taking a dive.
Well, I approach the subject of game fixing from 2 angles. One, like you said, is from the gambling aspect and getting players or referees to alter the outcome of a game for gambling purposes. And, I believe strongly that that's happened way more often than it's ever been uncovered or even discussed. In fact, here, I'll pose you guys a question. Here, let me throw a question at you. When was the last time the NBA admitted one of their games had been fixed by a gambler?
Never, right?
Well, take a guess. It happened, but take a guess.
Well,
I think it was a few, maybe 10 years ago, when that referee got busted.
No, Tim Donaghy did get busted for gambling, but he did not get arrested or charged with fixing a game. Although many people believe he did, that actually didn't come into play.
Okay.
The last time it happened was in 1954. Okay. Now, when's the last time a Major League Baseball game was fixed for gambling purposes?
What, 1918?
I think it was like 1919.
Yeah, the World Series, 1919 World Series. When was the last time an NFL game has been fixed by gamblers?
Sunday?
Dude, wasn't that Seahawks thing? That I thought of you. The Seahawks-Packers game. I thought of you, Brian.
But, thank you.
Controversial.
But actually, the NFL says it's never happened and it's a 100-year history. Which any gambler would just laugh in their face for saying that. But the fact is, nobody's ever been arrested or charged with fixing a game criminally for the NFL, or like say even Major League Baseball going back 100 years. So the leagues claim this has never happened. And yet I did an investigation where I got every file the FBI had through the Freedom of Information Act, which amounted to thousands of pages of information, which said not only has games have been fixed in Major League Baseball, in the NBA, in the NFL, but that Hall of Fame athletes were involved in potentially fixing games and at the very least gambling upon their own games in which they played.
Yes.
Now you think that would be a big deal.
Is the big deal though that these guys are engaging in gambling, which is a crime, or because they're fixing games in their own league, which is nobody's business?
Well, here's the thing. Now, what's actually a crime is there's really one law that relates to all this, at least federal law, and that's the Sports Bribery Act. And all that says is you cannot bribe a referee, a coach, or an athlete to alter the outcome of a game. Okay. But let's say just for sake of argument, say you're Aaron Rodgers, and you decide as Aaron Rodgers, I'm going to throw this game, and I'm going to, bet on Vegas that, like this week, the 49ers beat us, cover the spread, beat the Packers, and I, Aaron Rodgers, I'm going to go out and I'm going to throw 5 interceptions to make sure my team loses. That's not a crime.
Yeah.
There's no law being broken if he goes out there and decides to do that. And so that gets back to your self-regulating thing.
Well, and that gets back to another way of I look at games being fixed is I believe games are manipulated by the leagues themselves and sometimes by the athletes themselves to get certain outcomes to come true.
And what do you think some of the motivations are? I know you had a variety of them in your book. One in particular, you told a story about gambling for life when the NBA player went to the party.
You're talking about the film?
Yes.
Binkley, that was really
film.
Fascinating, that documentary. Can we ask him to recap that? And then we ask him a question?
Well,
no?
Here's the interesting story about that. So I get this video, which is technically a training video from the FBI, okay? And it's called Gambling with Your Life. And it was produced by the FBI in conjunction with the NBA. And what it is the FBI actually used to make presentations to all the major league teams and some college teams about the dangers of drugs and gambling. And they basically were warning you, hey, look, you fall into the wrong crowd, you can get compromised certain ways, and they can get you to fix games, which is amazing because, again, like the NFL and the NBA says, we never had a game fixed. So I can't believe, the FBI would even bother to show up and make these presentations if there's no threat whatsoever, as the leagues claim. But they did, and they made a training video. It was hosted by Greg Gumbel. Yeah. And it goes on, and basically in this video, the FBI and the people they interview, which are some former gangsters and mobsters, basically lay out the many different ways in which games have been fixed, which again, the NFL says has never happened, yet here they have guys saying we've done it.
I thought what was really interesting about that story in your book is the example of that. I believe it was an NBA player that they had a portrayal of where he goes to a party and somebody slips something in his drink or he drinks too much and they end up getting him into a compromising situation and photos are taken. And to me, it sounded like a CIA espionage operation or something you hear in Washington, D.C. So is this type of thing, do you believe this type of stuff is going on a regular basis, compromising these players in various ways?
Well, the story that you mentioned is a true story. And I've been actually trying for the past year to get more information on it because the guy who supposedly did it went by this alias of Dr. Bordeaux, which is a great name.
I was wondering about that, yeah.
And
find the one NBA player who drinks Bordeaux, and I think you've got your man.
But the FBI investigated and arrested this guy for doing that. And he had hundreds of names of athletes in his little black book, and many of which they believe he compromised. But I can't get any more information out of the FBI on this particular case because this guy's apparently still alive and, third-party Freedom of Information Act request, you can't get information without the third party's okay.
Wow.
And since I don't know who the third party is, I can't get it out.
That sounds like a Jeffrey Epstein level operation.
Yes. Some of the quotes you had in your book reminded me of Epstein. I don't remember the exact quote, but it was somebody saying something like, you don't want to be associated with me. If you're associated with me, everybody's going to... That sounded like something Jeffrey Epstein would do.
Who's a mobster who said that.
Yeah, I think it was Michael Franzese who said that.
Yeah. And this reminded me of something I read in the Franklin cover-up. I believe it was in the Franklin cover-up. It was like this pedophilia scandal that, I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but it involved Republican lawmakers, local and I think federal in the 80s. And one of the things I believe was in that book, but I'd read it somewhere, was that they would take new, freshman congressmen, invite them to a party in a brownstone and Georgetown or whatever, and they would slip them a roofie or whatever they would do, and they would get them in a bedroom and take a picture, kind of like the one you described in your book, and that was it. You own that guy for life. He didn't even remember it.
Yeah, and that's all they had to do, and that's what this Dr. Bordeaux guy was supposedly doing. And you think about it, today, there's not much of a stigma over homosexuality as there used to be, but still, name a professional athlete that you know of that's currently playing in the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, who is homosexual.
Well, here's the thing. I think
so if you get compromising pictures of that guy.
But I don't even think it's so bad for a guy who's homosexual. He might be able to own that. But the way what was described in that book was that the guy started with 2 chicks. And then they swapped out one of the chicks for a dude and took the pictures. You know what I'm saying? So I just feel like if it's who you are and you want to own that and have to wrestle with that yourself, that's one thing. But if they slip you a roofie or bait and switch, and I imagine when drugs and a lot of sex are involved with these young guys, young people are in a savvy, they haven't been around. Yeah. and are super excited about the glitter.
Well,
So
like
I could
said,
definitely see it happening. Mm-hmm.
I think you're right, and I think that's the thing is there are ways to compromise these athletes and the referees and the coaches as well, because people forget, they are people. They have problems. They have weaknesses. They have ways that you could get to them. They may have a gambling problem. They may have a drug problem. They may have a problem with their wife or their spouse or girlfriend or their mom or whatever. There are ways to get to these athletes and compromise them. And, just because a lot of fans, I think what happens is they have this disconnect where they, in a way, always wanted to be a pro athlete or whatever. Yeah. And so they believe all the cliches. They believe if it was them, they would always give 100% and, take it to the next level and blah, blah, blah. But yet with these athletes, it's a job and they have problems outside of their job and that can affect around their field performance. The question is, are they being compromised at certain times to affect around the field performance?
Well, this is what I want to go back to Binkley's question. How pervasive is it? Because I've heard you say the actual broadcasting rights is billions of dollars. The league generates revenues, billions of dollars. But the gambling revenue is multiples of that. And for me, True. I think, when you go to a casino in Vegas, how do gambling institutions make their money? Because the odds are stacked slightly in their favor. So how much of this goes on? How much has to go on to give the edge to the gambling consortiums that is it chronic? Is it every day or is it just every once in a while? Do you think?
The problem is there's no way of knowing. I mean, the interesting thing is the NCAA actually does a survey every 4 years of their student athletes and literally asks them, have you been approached to fix a game or shave points? Do you know of another athlete who has actually shaved points? Have you yourself done it? And every time they've run the survey over the past 20 years, they've gotten positive responses to all of those questions. So basically, we know through the NCAA that we're guaranteed that college football and basketball games have been fixed and have had points shaved in them. Which ones? Who knows? So right. Once we've seen around the world where game fixing is prevalent, especially in soccer, in cricket, in rugby, in tennis, and we know it's prevalent there, what they do is a lot of times they get a hold of young athletes and then work with those athletes as they move up the ranks, and then they're, fixing professional soccer matches. Well, it's probably the same thing that potentially could be happening here, where they get their hooks into a young athlete in the NCAA, he advances on to the NFL or the NBA, and potentially they get him to shave points there. But the problem is, nobody's looking for this. Nobody's investigating for it. The FBI itself, as I found out through my research, quit. They don't even look for this stuff. So if they're not doing it, and the media is certainly not going to go out of its way to do it, well, what does that leave? How are these things going to be exposed? I have no idea.
Well, you're exposing them, thankfully, and perhaps the FBI is the ringleader in organizing some of them, for all we know. When you talked about the college athlete thing, that's really interesting to me, because that is where I think that young athletes who come from low-income communities, but they're very gifted, I think could be compromised because they're not getting paid any money. And you talk a lot about paying athletes. You talk a lot about the creating the name of the student athlete. Tell us a little bit about just your thoughts on whether athletes should be paid and just how they've kind of corrupted the whole system of college athletics.
Well, college athletics have been corrupted since they were started.
Yeah.
That's the scary part is, you go back to the very first football games, which were in the 1890s, and Yale and Harvard actually hired ringers to come in and play football for them.
Yeah, that's what Georgia Tech did. I'm a Tech fan.
Isn't that what the whole thing is now, though? Isn't it just ringers?
Pretty much. But, it's, they have this whole high and mighty, air about college athletics and that. Well, it's been corrupt since day one. And my argument is even if you pay the players, there's no good way of figuring out how to do that.
Yeah.
Because what frightens me is, the highest paid state employee in 45 or 46 of the 50 states in the United States is a college football coach or college basketball coach.
Yeah, the guy got $500,000 last night just for the win. The LSU coach, I believe. He got another $500,000.
But I live in Wisconsin, and the highest paid state employee is the head coach for the Badgers.
That's crazy.
So my tax money goes to paying for him to work. I don't care. I don't care if the Badgers have a team.
Because the championship was already slated to be in New Orleans And then it happened to be like LSU's homecoming, basically. And I thought, oh, that's a coincidence that's super, super great for a lot of people's revenue. Like, it made it a great game. My husband went to the game and he was just like, it's so awesome. It's a home. I was like, uh-oh. But I saw that you wrote in your book, it shocked me what you wrote, but it was funny because my parents always said this, that they shouldn't have athletics in college. And my parents didn't even think they should have athletics in public school. They were like, go to Little League, have club sports. There are amateur leagues, professional leagues. There's no reason to pretend like these guys are going to school, and it costs money.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's fair. I think the only way to fix the system is to destroy it and let it sort itself out. Because, again, outside the United States, there are no college athletic programs in any country. I mean, you think, like soccer is huge in Europe and especially England. Well, there's no college soccer teams. They have like under 17 and 17 to 21, semi-pro soccer leagues. And that's where, if you want to try to make it as a soccer player, that's where you go. And that's what you do. But you don't go to college to play soccer like you do here. You go to college to play football.
The problem is that it looks to me like there's plenty of exposés that the student athlete isn't actually being held to the academic standards that are supposed to be the benefit of not telling him drop out of school and go be a sportsman. Stay in school, will give you a good education. That's what you're getting. But a lot of times people are told to give them A's and whatever. And then, so it's not really that they're getting the education.
Correct. And I think that's one of the issues with it all. And that's why, like I say, I don't think you can fix it. I don't think you can solve this problem unless you just eliminate it all. The problem with that is how many people are making how many millions of dollars selling the rights to these games to ESPN and everybody else.
And
that's why it still exists.
Yeah, and I've noticed that they're doing this with high school athletics now too, where they're putting these basketball teams, the next LeBron James, they promoted as, and they'll televise these games they have the national rankings now for high school athletics. Do you see, are they doing similar things to high school athletics? Are they also in jeopardy of possibly being compromised and point shaving or doing whatever?
I don't, hopefully nobody's betting on those games yet, but what worries me is that, you teach a young athlete, I mean, you're talking even a 7th and 8th grader in this day and age, that, if you're good at sports, you get treated differently and you get treated specially. And so in a way, you start corrupting athletes when they're 12 years old, if not younger in some cases, because I went to a private high school. We recruited a couple of kids specifically to come to our high school to play basketball.
Yeah.
So they had their tuitions paid for by other people who just promoted the school. They have these kids coming to play basketball. Well, guess what? You corrupted that kid right then and there, because then agents swooped down on one of the kids who was really good, and they probably corrupted him to get him into a certain college. And then agents came in again, corrupted him again, and got him all the way to the NBA. So this kid learned at the age of 12 how the system really works. And basically that, there's a different path in life for these kids. And problem is that not all of them become NBA stars. A lot of them get, chucked to the side of the road as things progress. But again, you've taught them and you've taught athletes all the way throughout their life that this is how the game is played. It's not really always above the board. There's a lot of stuff underneath it that we should all be worried about.
Yeah, and that they're privileged. They're kind of above because they have the athletic gifts. My brother played professional baseball for a little while, and he played at Georgia Tech, so I've been around a little bit. I've grown up. He's a lot older than me, but I grew up with a little bit of you get treated differently, definitely, when that happens.
And how did it work out? I mean, do you feel like that was a good thing for his outside of professional? Like, what I think the lie is that they act like because it's an extracurricular at a school that academics remains the primary interest of these kids, and stripping away that pretense might be a little better, because then they know the choices they're making along the way. I mean, did he get a good education? Did he use it, or was it always secondary? And
at that time of his life, baseball was primary. He left college. He got drafted his junior year, and he went back and eventually graduated afterwards after he stopped playing. And he has a good job. He does well for himself.
But then it really is a feeder system. It's really an athletic feeder thing, not it's not really about the education.
I think for most college athletes that have a shot at going pro, what do you think, Brian? I think probably their primary focus is trying to get into the league.
I think so too. I think that's what, NCAA basketball and football is minor league basketball and football.
Yeah,
it's just not
exactly
labeled as such.
And I have to say, I love your idea of abolishing college sports because I've been afflicted with being a Georgia Tech fan my entire life, and they are terrible, and it's torture all the time. And I want to ask you, this isn't in your book, but I want to know if you were familiar with the 1990 Colorado Buffaloes famous fifth down game.
Vaguely. I kind of remember it, but I don't remember the specifics.
Well, Colorado and Georgia Tech split the national championship that year. Tech went, I think, 11-0-1, and Colorado went 11-1. And one of Colorado's games, they got stopped on fourth down, and the game was over, but the referees miscounted. And they got a fifth down, and they scored a touchdown and won the game, and therefore split the national championship ultimately because of that. That's baffled me my entire life.
Well, so what's the rule?
They didn't have replay back then. Yeah.
But a ref mistake is okay?
Well, that's the thing, and that's why, like I say, I make this argument about games being manipulated by the leagues themselves, because they can do it through their officials and the officiating. And the thing is, people watching at home, I think you see this sort of thing, maybe not every week, but way more often than you think, where, you see clearly on your HD TV at home that some guy is out of bounds when he caught the pass, and you have to go to replay, come back and tell you, no, he was in bounds, and it's a first down or it's a touchdown, and you're like, wait a second, that's not what I just saw. I know what I saw. What are they looking at? And how are they ruling like that? I mean, how do you get a fifth down? How can you be that incompetent and go from 4 downs to all of a sudden being 5 downs? How can you be so incompetent that like in the Saints-Rams, playoff game last year, you did not call pass interference on a clearly pass interference play? And the thing that bothers me, which should bother fans too, is the officials who should be held accountable aren't. The guy who the 2 referees that blew the call in the NFC Championship game last year on the pass interference, they didn't get fined, they didn't get suspended, they didn't lose their jobs. Yet I think if you or I screwed up on a national stage like that at our job, we probably would have some sort of repercussion come down on us.
I would think so.
Yeah, that's the red flag to me. Like, that's the red flag when you talk about government conspiracies as well. It's like, did the guy who screwed up get promoted? Because when the guy gets promoted, it's like, why would that guy get promoted? He obviously, I mean, like the 9/11 guy said that some people were responsible for some really horrible mistakes and breaches of protocol were promoted, and you just have to scratch your head, like, what's going on there? There were a couple of, go ahead, Binkley.
There was something really, I had never crossed my mind that people would gamble on this until I read your book. Tell us about esports gambling, video game gambling, essentially. This just blew my mind.
Well, I think a lot of people, older people, and I would consider myself an older person now, because I'm in my 40s, I don't realize how big of an industry video games are and video game playing, and how many millions of dollars get pumped in there. I mean, some video game titles, they spend more time and energy making those, and they make more money than many Hollywood blockbusters.
Yeah.
And now these kids are playing these games, and especially, it started really in South Korea, but they're playing them professionally. I mean, they literally have leagues where they play NBA basketball through their Xbox and their PlayStation, and people watch it, and people gamble on it.
Yeah, See, that's what blows my mind, is people watching and gambling on it. That's crazy.
If there's a way to gamble on something, people will figure
that's right,
it out. But what the scary part is now you have these younger guys, and it's the same thing like with professional athletes. You have these younger guys who are playing video games for a living, maybe making some money, but not making a ton of money. And then you have somebody come along and say, hey, look, I'll give you, whatever, 10 grand because I can make 50 grand gambling against you. Why don't you tank this next match you play on your Xbox?
Yeah, that's too easy. That's so easy.
Wow.
But let me ask you, so now that gambling, there's that famous Supreme Court ruling that basically online gambling is legal, right? Isn't that how it kind of came down? It's starting in New Jersey, and it's basically going to spread all over the country.
States to...
Yeah, and I think like ESPN is revamping itself over time to kind of accommodate like the way the horse racing channel. I mean, it's all about the gambling. I think they're going to start kind of pivoting towards the gambling, and I wonder if that'll actually solve some of the fixing problems, because then maybe people will have, it won't be just pure entertainment with no standing in a court of law if you lose a bunch of money and it's legal. Do you have any opinion about that?
Well, I think you're right. I think they are, like, ESPN's pivoting more toward gambling, because everybody realizes, even the leagues, that a gambling fan is a fan who's going to watch the games. You know, if you're playing fantasy football for money, you're going to watch the game. If you're betting on the outcome of the game, you're going to watch the game. You're not going to bet on it and then walk away and not spend 3 hours rooting for the team you just bet on.
Yeah, so if I have to sit through a game, I'll sometimes bet on it. Because I just I cannot stand watching sports, but I'm just like, if I put $20 on this, then I'm going to care.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what it comes down to. But I think overall, legalization of gambling is a very good thing, because nobody knew, in terms of sports gambling in the United States, how much money was even being wagered. I mean, I've heard estimates up to $400 billion being wagered a year illegally on sports in the United States alone. I mean, $400 billion, that's an insane amount of money. But even if it's $100 billion, which many people think is at least true, well, now if you take it out of organized crime's hands, you make it legal. You may be putting it in a different crime family's hands now if it's legal.
Yeah,
but at least you have oversight.
It will have to, right, like, because that's a big problem with this. I know that you've cited a case before where the Jets fan didn't have the right to a fair contest. But if the government allows gambling is generally highly regulated, or at least, you know, anything the government allows, they feel like they have a responsibility for. Maybe that guy would have a different outcome or different standing in the court if he said, hey, like, this is an honest service and I have a reliance, you know, recognize it's like tantamount to fraud if somebody's allowing me to bet on this. No, you don't think that'll change?
And that's a scary thing. That's another reason why leagues can manipulate their own game, is because it doesn't actually even come down to fraud. And that's what that case showed, is when this Jets fan, who was a lawyer, sued the New England Patriots, over the whole Spygate scandal. He basically said, like you said, he believed he wasn't getting a fair shake. He wasn't getting a fair game when he paid all this money to go see it. And what the, judges ruled, the Third Circuit Court of Appeal ruled, was that when you buy a ticket to a sporting event, all the league has to do is basically put that sporting event on. If you paid to see an NFL game, they just have to put on an NFL game. It doesn't mean rules have to be followed. Doesn't mean certain players have to play. It just means that they can't go out and put a basketball game on. They have to play a football game. Right. If they played a football game, you got what you paid for. So even if they were cheating, even if they were fixing it, as long as they weren't necessarily fixing it for gambling purposes, but if it was just a big show, if it was a production like a circus or, a play, if that's what they did, they fulfilled their obligation as a league.
Well, it sure would, even if you don't look at the government for help, it sure would be honest and good reporting if the media is pivoting to gambling, for the media itself to be the ones to ferret this stuff out, to expose it. But in your experience, it's quite the opposite, right? The media not only doesn't expose it, it's complicit in covering it up. I have an example for you, but I want to hear your reaction.
Well, you look at ESPN. ESPN literally funds the NFL. They fund the National Basketball Association. They fund Major League Baseball because they give them billions of dollars a year. So as a company, why would you give the NFL, $1.5 billion a year and then go investigate it and out all the criminal behavior going on within that league? You're just going to shoot yourself in the foot because nobody's going to want to watch the product you just paid for. And I experienced that myself as when I wrote the book Larceny Games, which was based on all those FBI files. And like I say, I outed, 6 or 7 Hall of Fame athletes as gambling on games in which they played, which should have been big news. And in fact, my publisher was contacted by ESPN. I had talks with producers from 60 Minutes. HBO Sports was interested. We had a whole slew of people interested in this book, and then nobody did a single thing with it. Nobody reviewed the book. Nobody said the book was bad. Nobody said the book was good. They all pretended like it didn't exist. It just disappeared.
Who were
And
the
because
players?
Nobody paid attention to it. Nobody went and found it. Nobody bought it because nobody heard about it.
Who were the players?
Well, some of the players, I mean, they were big names. I mean, Wilt Chamberlain was involved. Bill Russell was involved. Len Dawson was involved. What's the other guy? George Blanda was involved. These were all guys the FBI named as being involved in gambling upon the games in which they played.
What about Jordan? Do you know anything about Jordan? I know I've heard some of the conspiracy theories, but I've never really dove into that one.
Well, I'm certain the first time he retired, he was basically kicked out of the league.
That's what I had heard.
Yeah, when he went to play baseball.
Yeah.
Yeah, that he had a gambling problem, and because
Yes.
he was such a big deal to like McDonald's and Nike and Chevrolet and the NBA basically said, "Hey, look, dude, you got to lay low for a while," and they got him out of there.
I think his father's murder was rumored to be associated with his gambling problem.
Potentially, yes. I mean, they, supposedly
It was around that time.
legally speaking, that had nothing to do with it, but I think in reality, it
could have been
huge deal.
Do you find yourself being followed by unmarked black cars frequently?
Black helicopters.
Not yet, or maybe they're very good and I'm just unobservant. But no, I think more what it is like I said with that book, is it's the sports media doesn't want to hear this stuff. They don't want to be involved. They'll interview me and be like, "Oh, here's the crazy conspiracy guy talking about."
But
games
you did
being
all this
fixed
based
for
on
fun.
FBI files. That
Well,
stuff
that's
was
just
all
it.
documented.
That's just it. But like I say, they'll talk to me and use me, like I say, as kind of fodder to, for this idea or that idea. But I think, overall, their goal is to make sure what I do and say doesn't see the light of day. Because again, if you can't get exposure from like ESPN or Sports Illustrated, well, not even Sports Illustrated so much, but ESPN, you don't exist. Because where else do you go for your sports news? So if they can silence you by omission, they will. And like I told you before the show, what scares me is I'm just writing about sports. Who cares? But the people writing about more important subject matter, how are they getting knocked out by bigger news stories and bigger news organizations?
WordPress. I can't even survive on the internet anymore with that stuff. But I wanted to ask you a boxing thing. So Max Kellerman's on ESPN. I always thought he was a good boxing commentator. I kind of like boxing. I'm not like super knowledgeable about it, but my brother's in the Golden Gloves and whatever. I always followed it. And I was at I love Triple G. Do you still follow boxing? I know you've dipped into it yourself in the past, Brian, but Triple G is the Kazakhstan guy, Gennady Golovkin, who was great. And he had this match against Canelo Alvarez, who was like up a weight class or two to fight him. And I was there at the event. It was on Mexican Independence Day. So the entire audience was Canelo's. I mean, they were just crazy for him. And I kind of liked him, but I was rooting for Triple G. And the decision, so we weren't obviously not watching it on television. We weren't listening to Kellerman like blow by blow it. We were just watching the match. And when it came out, the decision was a tie. This entire place, which was in Canelo's pocket, booed. Like it was such an egregiously wrong, fixed match that even fans of Canelo who benefited from it coming down as a tie were horrified. Like it was terrible. Like we were angry. It was bad, really bad. And Kellerman got up and for days after that, he apologized and it was like the chick judge who got it really wrong. And some people just, have a bad day, chicks, whatever. And then after that, like he was just so obviously not calling it as he saw it. And then his star really began to rise and he got a higher profile job and all that. But I just couldn't understand why ESPN I guess because Canelo's like the face job or North American or I don't know what, but they were just Triple G was like, this is pathetic. It was really pathetic and I was embarrassed, but I couldn't understand what was in it for them. Just that Canelo's good looking. I really think that's what it came down to. They had this media guy.
I was saying, and the question is who got to the judge and why? was it a gambling thing? Was it, you say, was it an ESPN thing? Who did it and why?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, one of the most shocking things, I think, in all my research was that I interviewed this guy by the name of Charles Farrell, who was a boxing manager for 5 different world champions, throughout the course of his career. And he told me, without a doubt, I mean, without batting an eye, he's like, oh, boxing matches are fixed all the time. He goes, I've done it. He goes, I've paid off judges. I've paid off this guy and that guy to get certain results. So,
I mean, the Pacquiao-Mayweather fight was another one that was like, what? Pacquiao looked like he took a dive on that. And, why? To get another match or?
And that's what it is sometimes. I mean, people laugh at professional wrestling and, think sometimes, certain people who are fans of it are, fools. But, there's no, legal difference between professional wrestling as sports entertainment and the NFL or boxing as sports entertainment. It's all the same thing. They can all do the same thing. It's just really professional wrestling is the most honest sport out there because they're telling you, hey, this is a big show and we're putting it on and our guys are athletic and our women are athletic and they can do certain things. But come on, they're not really getting hit with a 2x4 or with a table or with a chair. Come on, let's be honest with each other. But, the NFL and boxing, they say, well, this is all real. Nobody can, affect the integrity of our sport. Nonsense.
You make a great point there about the wrestling. The fans are just as rabid in wrestling about the team or the person that they want to win as they are in football or baseball, yet they know that the wrestling, they suspend disbelief, but they know that it's not real, but they're still just as rabid. And I think that might be what contributes getting away with it is that rabidness to want to win, just like in politics, like Monica mentioned earlier. I want to hear about Muhammad Ali, the alternative history.
I have to say, I met Muhammad Ali. I've always been a big fan. We always watch the fights, and it occurred to me recently. It's like, that big fight against Liston took a dive. I said, and then Muhammad Ali dropped out of the game for his, quote, prime. Maybe he wasn't as good as everybody said anyway. And then I read the chapter in your book, and I was like, wow, I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah, it's amazing because the same thing. My brother, to this day, is still a huge Muhammad Ali fan. So he wasn't happy with me either when I wrote that chapter. But I find it amazing is that I could make a clear case for the 3 times that Ali won the heavyweight title, and he's the only person to ever win it 3 times, that every one of those fights were fixed for him to win.
The Spinks one was undeniable, your description of that in the book. But how about the second one?
Well, that was the one I didn't think was until I heard an interview with George Foreman, because the second time he won, which was immortalized in that movie Ali, with Will Smith in the role. But Foreman had a lot of questions himself about that fight. He thinks he might have actually been poisoned. He thinks that his manager basically set him up and poisoned him. And because he lost energy after about 3 rounds, he said everybody thinks, well, it's because Muhammad Ali did the rope-a-dope and he just allowed Foreman to punch himself out. But Foreman was about 10 years younger than Ali. He was in his prime. He was 25 years old. He should have been able to pound Ali for 15 rounds, no problem. Instead, he claims that something was up with that fight and that he lost his energy within 3 rounds, and that's why Ali beat him. And for the people involved, money speaking, they wanted Ali to win. They needed Ali to win because, well, as we all know, he's become an icon.
Yeah. So his personality fueled, they wanted to keep that personality prominent.
Alive.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I think about Canelo. Triple G, I love him. He's tough as nails. He's my ideal boxer, but Canelo, I remember watching this fight and Canelo had big money TV commercials that he was starring in during this fight. And I was like, but he's he's not as good as Triple G. And my husband's like, he's just much better looking. I was like, oh, yeah. Wow. But the Foreman thing, he also said he thought the ropes were loose.
Well, think about this too. We're potentially at a Super Bowl where the 2 football players who are the spokesman for State Farm could be playing each other.
I hadn't thought about that.
Coincidental. You have Aaron Rodgers and Patrick Mahomes starting those State Farm commercials, and they very well could be in the Super Bowl playing each other.
Yeah, well, we know who wins that Super Bowl. The State Farm.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it the State Farm Super Bowl?
Might be. We haven't got there yet, but it's close.
Who are the biggest cheaters in history if you had to identify a group, whether it's a sport or a team?
Jeez. You mean fixers?
Fixers, yeah.
Well, I could put out two things. One, if you want to go to the boxing route, I mean, it's without a doubt, the 1950s and early 60s, boxing was controlled by organized crime.
Yeah.
And it was controlled by Frankie Carbo. Basically, one guy ran boxing for like 10 years, and then he sold it to CBS and NBC as Wednesday night and Friday night fights. I mean, I think that's remarkable that could happen and, not happen that long ago, but people completely forget it even occurred. But I think more recently, I think the NBA, when David Stern was in charge, was almost equally as corrupt.
Yeah.
And I think they were working with NBC, and they made Michael Jordan the name he is. They made the NBA what it is through what I believe was manipulation and fixing of games for a good 10, 15 years, no doubt.
And how about the draft?
Well, in the NBA draft, I think he fixed that. Like, I think he fixed it to make sure that Patrick Ewing wound up on the Knicks. I mean, I think that's without a doubt.
But how? With the frozen envelope?
No, all you gotta do is watch it. If you watch the video, which they used to have on YouTube, they might have pulled it again. But if you watch it, there's 7 envelopes. And the 4th envelope, which is the middle envelope, whether you start from the top or the bottom, he throws violently against the side of the hopper, which you shouldn't have to do if you're going to put the envelopes in a hopper and spin it. We'll just put them in and spin it. No, he throws it against the side and it dog ears. And you can clearly see he pulls the dog-eared envelope out, and that's the envelope that had the Knicks logo in it.
It had dog ears?
Well, it got bent over. Yeah, that's the thing. So
bent.
BuzzFeed has this video show that is called like Unsolved Sports Conspiracies. And it's just like all these like conspiracy theory shows that say that they're going to debunk it, and they really just cover it up. And they showed that, but they didn't, they didn't like just show the video from start to finish. They had like mock-ups of the video. So now I didn't even think to go watch it for myself.
Yeah.
But they're like, oh, we really don't know, and we don't think so, but...
Yeah, exactly. Well, everybody doesn't, of course it didn't happen. Yes, right. I mean, that's the thing is people, again, the NBA is a business. It's a multi-billion-dollar business. The NFL is a multi-billion-dollar business. And they have no legal constraint over them fixing the outcomes of games. And what I like to equate it to is McDonald's. Is if I told you McDonald's had a food additive that was FDA approved, perfectly legal, that they could stick in their Big Macs, that would make the Big Mac taste better every time you took a bite of it, McDonald's is going to put that in its Big Mac tomorrow.
Yeah.
And they're going to sell Big Macs all day long, every day, and make a bunch of money. And no one's going to care because it's perfectly legal, it tastes good, and everything's great. Well, guess what? That's exactly what the NFL can do. They can manipulate the game as you watch it legally to make it more exciting and make you watch into the 4th quarter to the 2-minute warning to the very end of the game, and they can do it legally. Why wouldn't they do it? If they're in business to make money, and that's why they play the games is to make money, why wouldn't they manipulate them when they have the perfect legal opportunity to do so?
If the door's open, they're going to take it.
Yeah.
My friend had a question because I was telling him about your book, and we got to talking about everything that people bet on. They bet on what the halftime show is going to be like. They bet on the coin flip and other stuff. Is there fixing of stuff like that, of like the coin flip?
Well, I don't think of the coin flip, but one of the most dangerous things in sports betting is what they call spot fixing. And that's something that's really only happened like in Europe and outside the United States so far. But they know what's happened, and it's happened a lot, like in cricket, for example. And that's when you can make these in-game bets. And they're kind of like proposition bets like that, where you can bet on who might, have the first yellow card or penalty in soccer and that sort of thing. And they know for a fact that guys have intentionally done things like gotten a yellow card because they know somebody's betting on them to be the first person to get a yellow card.
Wow. No, that's interesting.
So, I mean, if you can bet on balls and strikes, or in tennis, you can bet on individual points, or you can bet on individual games and individual sets. Well, if you're, a struggling or middle of the road tennis player, and you can make 10 grand by making sure you lose the second game of the second set, wouldn't you be maybe inclined to lose the second game of the second set? Because it's not going to necessarily cost you the whole match, but yet you could make 10 grand blowing that one game.
I want to go back to the NFL for a second. I never heard anybody say this, but I always wondered if Donald Trump blew up the USFL on purpose.
Because
he did a really stupid thing that ruined it. And I was like, why would a savvy guy do that?
It's a good question because there was a great documentary about the USFL and his involvement in it. And he referred to the league as I think small potatoes in the end. But his goal was to become an NFL owner.
Well, that's
and
what
he was trying to do it through the USFL. Yeah.
But if I recall correctly, the USFL was actually gaining some traction, and he decided to use all of his influence and power to get it to go head to head with the NFL, which was exactly the opposite of what the point of the whole league was. There was no way. So
I don't know. I mean, it might have been.
Why would he do that? Somebody.
Yeah, it might have been some jealousy.
Some
might have been some anger involved in that decision.
Backroom dealing for him. He certainly landed on his feet ultimately.
He does like to make some deals. There's something interesting. I want you to help me understand it a little bit better. I don't really care much about NASCAR. To me, watching cars drive in circles over and over again, I just, I just can't take it. But reading your book, you're talking about were you saying that almost all of NASCAR is owned by like one family or one group?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, the France family actually owns NASCAR. They own the league, for lack of a better term. Yeah, they own it. So same thing, they can do it if they want.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's why you get some of these weird yellow flags in races and you get certain results that seem kind of shady. Well, they own the league. They can do with it as they please. And I mean, I wrote about a thing called, they call it The Call. And it wasn't something I invented. It was a conspiracy theory about NASCAR that's existed since the 1970s, where certain drivers or owners of teams would get a phone call from, NASCAR that says, hey, today's not your day, guys. Stand down.
And that's why maybe they help one of their teammates out, because people on the same team.
Shake and bake.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. That's exactly it.
So I'm just trying to think through the gambling thing. So the France family owns NASCAR. They can do whatever they want. It's a cartoon or however they want to do it. It's a show. It's wrestling. Then some outside entity gets people to bet. And they say, well, even if my mother bets on horse racing all the time. And she says, I know it's fixed, but I don't know how it's fixed, so I could still win. so it's like,
true.
You know
it's
what I mean? That's
true.
her idea. So the only way is that if the guy who's taking a big, big bet knows it was, there was an example in your book that was like the Ali case. So they said that, I guess Ali was going to beat Spinks or something. They took a really, really big bet and so the gambler knew and exploited that. But I wonder once it goes legal, if somebody like David Stern says, and he did say stuff like this, or like the MLB guy said yesterday, that these guys didn't know, or this has never happened in the NBA, or we don't tank games, or any of that. They make statements that gamblers, if it's legal to gamble, do they have any right to rely? I mean, these are statements. Okay, so maybe, I don't know if they benefit from or whatever, but I'm just thinking at some point, these guys are making assertions that they are providing something that they might not be legally obliged to do, but are they allowed to lie to your detriment? I guess it's a First Amendment question.
Yeah, it would.
Sorry,
guess.
might be
Here's the thing.
Out of our league.
Think about it this way. You can bet on the outcomes of professional wrestling matches.
Right.
Yeah.
If you can bet on that.
That's
Then, it's kind of buyer beware,
Right.
Isn't it? I mean, if you think the NFL's fixed and you're still gambling on it, that's up to you.
That's interesting, yeah.
But there's just something about those people in position. See, because plus the leagues in a lot of ways, I mean, I don't know the details, but I've seen some of them, and you've talked about it too. Like, these leagues are protected. They're given advantages as a monopoly. They're kind of exempt from antitrust. They don't follow the normal rules of an industry. Legally speaking, right? I mean, they do have certain, like, I just don't feel like this is just some dog-eat-dog world out there. They have a kind of shroud, a halo effect from their privileged, exalted position where they want to talk about they talk about this stuff in Congress sometimes, the BCS or whatever. And I just feel like at a certain point, if you have this exalted position and you make this statement, you're in a position of trust. I mean, I feel like the fix has to really be in for these judges even to come down and say, buyer beware. I mean, I'm all for buyer beware, but that's not really how our system works. A lot of times,
I mean, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I was gonna say, we kind of gave the leagues that power, though. You know what I mean? I mean, it wasn't really. I mean, it was kind of granted to them, but at the same time, fans and again the media has kind of given them that high and mighty stature that they probably don't deserve by any rate. You know, I mean, there's plenty of questions to integrity in any sport you want to look at. So, I mean, if you want to say, they're talking from this high ground or whatever, I don't think they have that moral high ground. I think it's just we've seen enough of ESPN and some of these other sports media outlets that give them this high ground.
Well, that's like the politics. I'm like, they were all lying to you and you know it.
We
like,
put them there.
And everybody will say, so I have a political radio show where people call in. So when Obama was in office, people would call in with completely understanding that all the politics and the media and everything were completely fixed. And then when Trump is in, it's like, well, he's doing his best. I'm like, dude, they know, and yet they don't. They want the hero.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's just it is people, there's this thing they have, which I never knew about until I wrote the books, was they have this, I mean, it's a technical term called basking in reflective glory or burgeoning. And basically what it is people feel good when the team they support does well. Yeah. And so that's why if you listen to sports radio, when a team's winning, when the fans call in, they'll say, we need to do this or we need to do that or wasn't that a great win for us? The fan's not on the team. He kind of gets this mental image that he is, and when their team's doing bad, he'll often distance himself and say they need to do this or they need to do that.
Right.
But that's the problem. Is it's actually kind of almost like a drug for fans, and
I think,
the leagues know
absolutely.
This. They prosper off of that.
Put your finger on the Trump cult of personality thing a little bit in that, and Binkley has told me this, and I've noticed it from callers, that what they say they like about him, why they really will go to the mat for this guy, is that he will mouth off to the liberal media. He will say mean things to CNN that they wish they had the opportunity to say. They're
exactly.
so happy somebody's saying it, and that's to them, they feel like they are one with him in that he's doing that.
Well,
so I can see the parallel.
I think that's
continue.
what's in play.
Yeah, and I can tell you as a Georgia Tech fan that on the rare occasion that they do get a victory, I can't even enjoy that good feeling that comes because I know how stupid it is, but because it's like an addiction that you can't break, it's like, well, I guess I got to feel kind of good right now about something that I didn't have anything to do with.
I do find myself caught up too, and I'm amazed because I really don't have a horse in any race. And if I go to one of these, I do like Triple G, but if I go to some sporting event and I'm with a certain fan base, I'm super excited when that side wins.
Yeah.
Well, they've found that, the home field advantage exists, basically because the leagues make it exist. I mean, they've kind of done the studies that have shown that officiating does intentionally lean in the way of the home team, because they found that the more often a home team wins, the more, merchandise gets sold, the more hot dogs get sold, the more, coverage the team will get. So that's why most teams win more often at home, because I think it's an artificial creation because it creates more revenue for everybody involved.
It's just like the
because of
casinos.
this whole idea.
It's a tiny little advantage makes all the money for the casino. It's just that little that little tiny odds advantage, which you know about. You realize they have to put the brick and mortar in. You have to pay them. You're paying for your entertainment. You're not sure how much you're paying for it. But yeah, I think that's why it all comes down to that tiny little consistent margin is where all the money comes from. Maybe we cracked the code. That was kind of the code I wanted to crack. Like, how big a deal is it? How pervasive is it? And it's really just comes down to being a difference maker.
Yeah, that's all it needs to be. I mean, like you said, with a gambler, if you have a 5% edge and you can push that to 7%, you'll do it because 7's better than 5. And I think that's what it is with the professional sports leagues. Is I don't think the NFL's rigged like professional wrestling where they determine the outcome of every game. But if there's a certain storyline or certain player they want to promote and kind of make sure that that person advances perhaps into the playoffs or into the Super Bowl, if you give them a couple of, bonus calls on the officiating side or, don't call them for holding or pass interference or that sort of thing, those slight differences are enough to make a difference in the outcome of a game. And that's all it takes. You don't need all 11 guys in on the fix. If you just get one dude to do the right thing at the right time, that little advantage is all it takes to tweak the outcome of a game.
And I think that point right there is what a lot of people don't recognize, is that it isn't a whole bunch of people that have to be involved in order to change the outcome of a game like that. I think we are running right up till the end here. Monica?
I wanted to just say next time, Brian, I wish we had a chance to touch on it. I want to hear about disaster governments, your book, National Emergencies, Continuity of Government and You. That's a little bit more in my wheelhouse, but I find this very fascinating, and I want to go another level with you on that.
So where can people find your book, Brian?
They can either go to my website, you could get an autographed copy straight from me at thefixesin.net, or else Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever good books are sold. Your local bookstore will probably even get it for you if you ask them. Fantastic.
Check it out. It's a great read.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on. I really loved picking your brain about that, and I loved just some of the things really rang a bell with me, and I was surprised that I could even follow it because I really have no experience in sports whatsoever, but it just made sense, and it was fascinating.
Well, people always say I ruin sports for them, and I'm not trying to ruin it for you. I'm just trying to make you a more informed fan so you understand what you're watching and consuming. And that's more important. Just
have a cocktail and still have fun.
That way you don't have to fight with your best friend who is a fan of the rival team. It's all...
Exactly.
Now we're getting personal with Binkley. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Brian, and hopefully we'll talk to you again.
Yes, thanks again for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Brian.